Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.
The Rockin' Review is thrilled to bring you a Grammy, Emmy, and Dove award-winning producer, mixologist. I mean, he does it all. He's got a brand new book out, Chairman at the Board. Bill Schnee, thank you so much for coming on the Rockin' Review.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
You know, I know we've bumped into each other in Nashville since you've been here for about 3 years, but what an illustrious career that you have had over the last 50 years. And I've really enjoyed, you know, and I think I told you this before we started the interview, reading the book and hearing your in-depth stories, but also I like the tongue-in-cheek humor that you bring to these stories also.
Yeah, I wanted to make it entertaining, so I did my best. I had a little too much shtick in it at first. Like the first chapter started with telling a little bit about myself, and I started by saying I was born in Phoenix, Arizona at a very early age, and that kind of, and so I on the first rewrite, the shtick went away.
You know, I kind of like the shtick, but that's me, because I was going to bring up that, you know, you came from a family to where, you know, your father was a huge fan of classical music and your mother played the organ. And so you actually started out, you know, before you got into being a producer and engineering and everything else, you started out as a musician, right, Bill?
Right. Started in grade school on the trumpet, and then I switched to sax. And then a little later, when I was about 12, I started on keyboard piano lessons. And
which primed you up for the LA Teens, which had a record deal with Decca.
Right. When my parents moved to Los Angeles when I was 16 for my senior year of high school, and I found some guys starting a band, and I asked if they thought an organ would fit in, and they said, sure, let's try it. And we did some demos and got a record deal with Decca Records.
You know, there's so many great stories in here, and you know, with so many bands, and you're not bragging at all, you're just kind of sharing these things. But, you know, one of the first, some of the first tracks you got to actually work on, Bill, involved the Three Dog Night.
Yeah, the quick story, I'll try to make it quick, is that we recorded at Capitol and Western for Decca Records, two of the best studios to this day in Hollywood. And when we got dropped, because in those days you did 4 songs, and if one of them became a hit, you ran in and cut 6 more, and we didn't get to cut 6 more. When we got dropped, I went to an engineer, producer, a musician that had played on those records, named Richie Podler, and he got us a second record deal. And when I went into his studio for the first recording, funky as it was, the sound that came out of the speakers just blew me away. I never felt such emotion from the band, so much so that I pointed at all the equipment and said, can you teach me how to do this? And he said, no, I'm teaching Cooper. Go on out there and do another take. But that was the defining moment for me, that set my life's work right then and there.
Well, you know, once again, so many names that I recognize too, such as working with Al Cooper and things like that. And one of the things that really touched my heart in here, and as we both know, you know, and you use the Hunter S. Thompson quote in your book, which we all know, but it's like, was where the dark side of the music industry on a song that I'll always remember, Rock and Roll Heaven. And you kind of gave that whole story about how much of a lesson it was for you, Bill.
Yeah. Back up 1 second, because I went off the rails there and never talked about Three Dog Night. Richie Podler, that producer engineer that inspired me so much, when 3 years later, I came back to him because I learned engineering. I went off into a little Mickey Mouse studio and started learning. And it came very quickly to me. And less than 3 years later, I was back on his doorstep begging him for a job. And basically, he went for it. He let me cut a demo one day, a demo the next day. And then the third day, he said, okay, go in and record with Three Dog Night. And so basically threw me into the pool. And fortunately, I swam.
Fortunately for all of us, I mean, you've got 125 gold and platinum records and continue to be so strong within the industry. And I mean, the list of artists you've worked with is like a who's who, including, you know, Barbra Streisand, you know, Boz Scaggs, Huey Lewis and the News. It was funny. I told you this, I was getting ready for this morning for work, and I'm listening to Pablo Cruz and thinking about, you worked with Pablo Cruz.
Yeah, they did one record and A&M. Those were the days when if the company believed in an artist, they'd let them do 2 or even 3 albums to go into the black. And they did their first album. They sent me the first album. They said, "Would you like to do their second?" I met with them, and it didn't go down well because they didn't have any songs they written, and they wanted to record right away. So I said, "Let me come up and work with you," and but they didn't. So they went in with someone else and cut their second album. And then, but about a year and a half later, I got a tape in the mail with 3 demos on it. And the second one was "What You Gonna Do?" And I called them up and said, "I'll be right up," because I knew it was a hit right away.
I think that's something unique about you and unique about that time, with so great music that is still, it's a high bar, a high watermark for all music, was that you had such a great ear for songs and everything as well. And then putting them with the artist. And I got to bring this up to brag on you. One of the industry standards still for when anybody is going to check, a sound system, in-ear monitors or anything is Steely Dan. And 2 of your Grammys came from 2 albums working. What was it like working with Steely Dan?
Well, it was, needless to say, the album Asia, it was phenomenal. Now, I had some friends that Jeff Picaro and Michael Omartian, who also lives here, who had worked on their previous records and had told me about their maniacal ways. And I don't really like, insanity in the studio. I like to work fast. I get in, I like to work fast because that's where my creativity sparks and so on. So when Gary Katz, the producer, called and said, "Would you like to do the new album?" Of course, I jumped at it, but it was with a little bit of fear and trepidation about it. But it turned out to be nothing like that. That album, and that album alone, from what I understand, is the only one where it was all studio musicians and it was a no drug zone. That was different. It was a no drug zone. And there was, we started at 2 p.m. and quit fairly early. They were just very civilized and wonderful and just unbelievable material. Every day I would pop a cassette in the car on the way home with the day's work. And what is this? It's a little jazzy, but it's certainly not jazz. And it's a little bluesy sometimes. It's not blues, and it rocks sometimes. I don't know what it is, but I know it's incredible.
Well, it's amazing too how the music of Steely Dan has permeated multiple generations now. Like even my 15-year-old daughter is hooked on Steely Dan and other artists that you worked with too. And I mean, I could do a whole show just on the list of your artists, but such as Whitney Houston, Marvin Gaye. I mean, just ridiculous artists, Bill, that you got to work with over the years.
Yeah, needless to say, I'm very appreciative. I've had a very blessed career.
And it continues. I got to bring this up too. One of the other fun things I think about your book of a chairman at the board was that at the back, you have 2 extra chapters that are kind of, to me, because you come from a musician and a songwriter background, but it's for people like me, it's very helpful because you give some of your recommendations in the back of this book. So besides being autobiographical about your life, the artist, and about the music industry, you're kind of helping everybody out with this also with those final 2 chapters.
Yeah, actually, as it says in the intro, I wrote this book for anyone like me that loves music and records, but hasn't been as fortunate as I have to go behind the curtain. And I really did write it for the guy next door. And as a result, it's not the book a lot of people might have been expecting from me. There was the publisher when I turned it in I said, "How do you like my voice?" That I wrote it for the guy next door. And he said, "Yeah, it's pretty good, but why don't you do some stuff for educational purposes?" So I went back and wrote those 15,000 words. And that was harder than the first 85,000 that's in the book, to be honest. But it was great because it forced me to think about things that I haven't thought about in 50 years. And things that are second nature. And where did that come from? They're second nature when you do it over and over and over again. But where did that come from?
And that's what I liked about it was, obviously, it so well. It's like asking a musician to break down a solo, no matter what instrument they're playing. Because if they're in the moment and it's impromptu, they really can't tell you what they did. They just do it. And it's the same with you. And I love the photos in here also inside your studio. I also saw that obviously the guitar toilet probably helped in a lot of the production sequences, right?
Yes, the studio toilet in my recording studio in Los Angeles was a guitar.
Yeah, but what a beautiful studio.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and great sounding. I built the studio for one reason, to get a room with a sound, because I had grown up in the 70s where leakage had become a bad word. And once we went to multi-track, and before that, the sound of the room helped the ensemble, and leakage was just a part of the sound, and no one thought anything about it. But once it became multi-track where you had control, then people wanted complete control so that they could fix mistakes and so on. So all the studios that were built in the 70s were really, really dead. And the problem with a dead room like that is that, sure, the sound won't get across the room into someone else's mic, but it doesn't sound that good in their own mics. So I built a room with a sound. I used the old Celotex, the stuff, the 1 foot squares with holes in it that a lot of classrooms used to have in the ceiling. And all of the interrogation rooms on TV and police stations have it. Not that I've ever seen one of those. Anyway, but all the radio studios use that, and as well. And I always remember that it was deadening, but it wasn't anechoic. And so anyway, it turned out great, and the room sounded great.
And talking about all these great things within your book and your career, Bill. But one of the high points to me, must be for you. How was it to end up on the cover in the artwork on Ringo's album? And I saw the picture of you holding a tape reel, and you're in the front on the cover. What was that like?
It was pretty wild, but then again, that whole album was pretty wild. I mean, it was in that album that for the first and only time I had 3 of the Beatles playing together since the breakup, and they would never do it again. And that was on John Lennon's song. They all kind of, the way I've interpreted it is that the other 3 all kind of giving Ringo a leg up. So they all wrote songs for him to help get his solo career going. They knew their own careers would be fine because they were all good songwriters, but they did that to give him a leg up. And when John came in, we'd already been recording with George and Ringo, and now I had 3 of them. The funny thing to me is at that point in time, McCartney had a drug bust in the United States and couldn't come in the country. So who knows, if that hadn't been the case, that he might not have hopped on a plane like George had done and come over to record his song, and we might have had a real Beatle reunion. Instead, we had to go to England to record his song. And not that I'm complaining, but it's fun to think about what might have been.
Well, and also that, forever, your image is on the front of Ringo's album, holding a tape reel, which from the old 2-inch tape days, which my preference for a warmer sound. I want to make sure for our viewers also, Bill, I know that you had to go in and edit a lot in this book, and you had like 60,000 words that were not included in here, which easily could have been. And so those are on your website. They can purchase the book, anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Books A Million, you name it. But if they want an autographed copy, and if they want to read the extra chapters, they need to go to your website, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The key to the extra chapters is in the book. And but if they want a book, they can write me. There's a contact page there on the billschnee.com, and I'll figure out how to get it to them.
Well, and I was thinking also, Bill, it'd be pretty easy for you to start, being based here in Nashville and working at so many of the studios here, such as Blackbird and Ocean Way and everything, that maybe there should be like a master's class video series from Bill Schnee coming out in the next year or so.
Yeah, I've got a lot of people talking about that, including our mutual friend, John McBride, has been talking to me about doing that. He's going to be doing some of that stuff, and he wants me to get involved in doing that.
I think it's a good idea, and John, like yourself, is another world-class producer and engineer, so he might be onto something that you need to do, Bill.
Okay, I'll think about it.
Well, in your spare time, I'll tell you what, I love the brand new book, Chairman at the Board. Bill Schnee, thank you so much for coming on the Rock and Review. What a great book, and so many great, stories, but also suggestions on how to make your recordings better, to get the most out of your songs, your demos, and everything. And I think it's just incredible. Thank you so much for coming on the Rock and Review, Bill.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Sponsored by the Big 98, Nashville's #1 for new country and the home of the Bobby Bones Show.